Today we're going to talk about the expansion of Greece, and specifically a couple of wars that really led to Greek prosperity and eventually led to the downfall of the Greeks. And we'll look at that a little bit closely as we go along. The first war we really look at, I'm going to have some videos to go along with this, is a very interesting war called the Persian Wars. Okay, and we talked about Persia before, and always remember writs. Okay, the Persians were known for the royal robes. All right, that's the R in writs. Imperial bureaucracy, the I in writs. The T is toleration for conquered people, and then the Z is for Zoroastrianism, which it was the religion of the Persians. So we're going to look at this, and really one of the movies that kind of sort of really explain this in a good way or well is the movie 300. If you've ever seen that, just think about Persia, Sparta, and Athens. So around 500 BC, Greeks in Asia Minor rebelled against the Persians. So these were part of those Greek colonies, and Athens helped those Greek colonies fight off the Persians, which led to a conflict called the Persian Wars. Okay. These conflicts lasted till about 479 and were known as the Persian Wars. If you look at this map too, the Persian Empire really stretches out into Asia Minor. It's not really the best map, but it stops in after he gets to Macedonia and coming down into the Greek sort of mainland. So the Athenian League and Peloponnesian, if you look at the Persian Empire, this is where Persia gets stopped. So we're going to look at this, and we're going to try to figure out why these wars happened and the results of those wars. So Darius easily crushed the Greek revolts, and then he wanted to punish Athens. And so wanting to punish Athens, he really didn't expect Sparta to side with Athens. So he was kind of like, I want to get back Athens. I want to, pay them back for helping the Greeks, even though he easily beat the Greek revolt. In 492, he conquered Thrace and a place up to the north called Macedonia. Right? And we're going to learn about Macedonia a little bit later. But he's setting himself up. If you look at that map, Macedonia is, directly to the north of the Greek, sort of mainland. If you look, and we're still looking at Greek city-states. Remember, the Greeks are separated into city-states primarily because of, geography, mountains, and things like that. So the Greeks conquered, the Persians conquered Thrace and Macedonia right to the north. And this is going to set up sort of the invasion of Greece by the Persians. So 2 years later, the Persians invaded Greece. Athenians defeated the Persians at the Battle of Marathon. So if you look at that map, you'll see where Marathon is located. I know it's a little bit small. And then you have Athens down below that. So one thing you have to know is the Athenians defeated the Persians at the Battle of Marathon. Is one of the battles that they won. And this comes the story of Phidippides and the word marathon. You have heard the word marathon before. A marathon is a race in which people run 26.2 miles. Why? This battle is the reason for that race and the reason that people run 26.2 miles. Okay? It's because Phidippides was an Athenian herald. Right? He was sent to Sparta to request help when the Persians landed at Marathon. He ran 150 miles in 2 days. Right? That's pretty crazy and impressive. But after the Battle of Marathon, he ran what's roughly 40 kilometers or 26.2 miles from the battlefield of the town of Marathon to Athens to announce the Greek victory over Persia. He yells out the word, which would be translated into Nike or victory. We have won. We are victorious. And then he dies on the spot. Okay. Most accounts incorrectly attribute this story with Herodotus. Herodotus was not a runner. He did not run. So the Battle of Marathon is why people run 26.2 miles. Because Phidippides ran and eventually, went and told of the victory of Marathon. Everybody went nuts and went crazy, was happy, and then he dies on the spot. So in 480 BC, Darius' son Xerxes led another huge Persian army against the Greeks. And it always reminds me of what happened in America when George Herbert Bush, he defeated Iraq in what was the first sort of, Operation Desert Storm, the first war that we had, that people really kind of forget about. It wasn't really much to it, but he did not invade them the way you normally would. And then his son would come back and try to finish the job. So this is a great example of Xerxes trying to finish the job that his father and grandfather had started. So Darius' son Xerxes leads another huge Persian army against Greece. So the Persians had to advance through the narrow pass of what's called Thermopylae. This is where it's one of the most famous battles, and historians, I'm a military historian, so when I was in college, we really focused on the strategy behind this battle, how it worked, but 300 Spartans met at least anywhere from 10,000 to 50,000 people and held that many soldiers there for 3 days. I'm going to add some videos from the movie 300 in which you see some of the battles, the phalanx, how the Spartans were able to really use this formation to win this battle. The movie is really kind of brutal and gory. I mean, you don't have to watch it, but it really does show you what's going on. I think one of the best parts of the movie, though, is when Leonidas kicks the Persian messenger into the hole because, basically the Persian messenger goes, hey, look, you can keep your land, you can keep, and this goes back to that Persian tolerance of conquered people. We don't have to fight. You can keep your land, you can keep your gods, your religion, you can keep everything, but you just got to pay a tax and you got to kneel. And that's where Leonidas is like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. So 300 Spartans took on 10 to 50,000 people at the Battle of Thermopylae. So Plutarch wrote about the sayings of kings and commanders. When Pedidarius was not chosen to be one of the 300, honor which ranked highest in the state, he departed cheerful and smiling, with the remark that he was glad if the state possessed 300 citizens who were better than himself. So that means it was the best of the best. It's like the special forces, all the best soldiers were part of this 300. And, he was glad that he knew that the best were getting ready to go down there and fight in this battle of Thermopylae. Eventually, a spy led the Persians around a mountain pass, and they surrounded the Greeks. One of the best, saddest scenes, I guess sad is probably the best way to look at it, but the Spartans refused to surrender, and they fought till they were all killed. So the Spartans were like, wow, they're not going to be taken captive. They're going to fight to the very end. And the movie, it's really dramatic. It shows Leonidas standing there, and all these arrows are shot at him, and eventually, all of the Spartans are killed. A lot of people want to believe that the Spartans won this battle. They did not. But because they fought so well and they were, brave and they fought to the very end, greatly outnumbered, people look at this as like one of the most significant battles in the history of warfare. It is, and the movie is really far-fetched. It's really crazy, but for the most part, the Spartans were there. And look, Athens was there as well. There were a lot of Athenian soldiers that tried to hold these soldiers off, and a lot of them retreated and returned to Athens because they knew that the Persians were headed that way. But um, Spartans decided to all fight until they were killed. So the Persians then march towards Athens. Xerxes destroys Athens. All right. Um, it goes without saying the Persians are going to take on Sparta and Athens, and they do eventually destroy what is most of Athens, but it's not the end of the world war. You lose a battle and you move on, but one thing you see in the pictures, these are the pictures from the movie, and this is the Spartans taking on what's called the Immortals, and the Immortals was, like the special forces of Persia's army, and there's a movie even about them. But eventually, what happens, Sparta and Athens are going to team up with each other. Another video I'm going to put on there is this man. His name is Themistocles. He was Athens' leader. He tricked Xerxes into attacking the Athenian fleet in the narrow Salamis Strait. And when he does this, the water is real choppy, it's narrow, it's hard for the Persian ships to really, move around, and they eventually defeat them. And one of the interesting stories is that Xerxes watches from, the mountaintop because he thinks that his ships are going to, beat up on Athens because they have a much larger navy, but the Greek ships were more maneuverable, and they would basically ram into the larger ships, put holes in them, and sink them. So the Greeks sank most of the Persian ships. This was a really, it's something that I always think about when it comes to warfare and fighting. And what Themistocles did was basically he baited the Persians into coming into, an area, and their arrogance led them there, and eventually they were defeated. So, he had a great military plan, great military strategy, and he sank most of the Persian fleet. And don't forget, this is Themistocles in the Battle of Salamis, the Salamis Strait. In the end, Athens and Sparta joined forces, and this is odd. Athens and Sparta don't really get along. They're really kind of different. Sparta's militaristic. Athens is your thinkers and smart people. But in this instance, during the Persian Wars, Athens and Sparta joined together to defeat the Persians. Threat of invasion from the Persian Empire continued, and because of that, each of the city-states would form leagues to try to help each other. The Delian League is an alliance of city-states in which Athens was the leader. Peloponnesian League would be created by Sparta, and it would be basically the people that they conquered or the city-states they conquered in them. But in the Delian League, Athens was a leader. Each city-state would be, contribute money or ships or things like that to Athens, and they would, use it for defense against Persia. All right. After the Persian War, and because of the Delian League, Athens becomes strong, and it leads to the age of this man named Pericles. Pericles was a great leader, a great statesman. He helped rebuild Athens after the destruction by the Persians. He was a leader from 461 to 429. Look how that counts down. That's BC, so it counts down. Leader of Athens. Athens reached its peak of power and wealth under Pericles, and that's why they call it the Age of Pericles. He rebuilt the Parthenon. He rebuilt a lot of what had been destroyed during the Persian Wars. And because of this success, this was called the Age of Pericles. Under Pericles, Athenian democracy reaches its height. All male citizens, except for the lowest class, would hold office. One thing you have to know is women had really no say-so in government. Women rarely took part in the government. They didn't really have a lot of rights. If you go back to the original notes, women weren't, in ancient times, in most cases, women had no political part in any type of government or any type of political thing, unless it was like Cleopatra and people took power in a odd way, I guess you would say it. Also, many residents who were not citizens were not allowed to vote, and it was really, to keep Athens sort of, I guess, what they considered pure. People who were outsiders had little political pull, and of course, slaves had no political power and no rights whatsoever. Pericles had extended the empire that Athens had built, and empire is probably, I don't even really look at it that way. It's really trading and things like that, But Pericles, with the money from the Delian League, did help extend and, really, I guess what you would say, expand, what Athens was doing during this time. The Delian League was not democratic. Athens was in charge. So, and I'm not saying it was really like extortion. It's like this. So, a bully like Persia is bullying smaller city-states. Well, Pericles and Athens would say, hey, you got to pay us, and if they attack you, we'll protect you. All right? So it's sort of like paying for a bodyguard. So these other city-states would give them money, but when it came to making decisions, Athens was in control. Okay? They were in charge of everything. Pericles used the money for the good of Athens. He rebuilt many things. For example, the Parthenon, he rebuilt. And we'll look at that as we go along. But he forced more city-states to join the league, which made Athens extremely wealthy. Now, because of this wealth and because of this sort of newfound greatness, he forced more city-states to join the league. And the city-states that joined the league were forced to give them more money. This also sort of led Sparta to kind of go, we don't really like what's going on here. The balance of power is shifting. And so it led to the next series of war, the Peloponnesian War. Okay? This is a war between Athens and its allies and Sparta and its allies. Tensions grew between Athens and Sparta until war broke out in 431 BC. Spartans had the stronger army, and when you really think about it, because they're not really on the coast and they're kind of landlocked, they don't have a very large navy because they really didn't need one. All right, so they weren't like protecting shipments or anything or ships that were coming in. They were basically the stronger army. They lived in that valley that you saw in earlier set of notes. They began by invading the Attic Peninsula. Now, Athens had a better navy, and remember, they had very little, farmable, arable land, so they had to really rely on bringing in food by ships. Okay, so one of the things you have for your navy is it protects your, the navy protects your shipments coming in. Okay, so if you're bringing food in, you got Navy ships to protect it and make sure nobody messes with that. The war continued for a long time, 27 years, very, very bloody war. When we talk about historians, the historians looked at this period, and it was really not a good period. Many tragedies were wrote about this war, people getting their heads cut off and people hacked up. Warfare in ancient times is not a pleasant thing because they're using swords and spears. It's very close. You see your enemy in front of you. A lot of hand-to-hand fighting and things of that nature. This was a very brutal war. So what eventually happened is Persia, out of all the things, so Sparta had helped Athens beat Persia. Now Sparta, with the help of Persia, managed to block Athens' food supply. One thing that you will learn is if you block food, okay, then you are going to, probably win the war because most people don't want to fight hungry. If people are starving, eventually they're just going to give up. Starving, Athenians finally surrendered. This really reminds me of when, the Gulf War, the first one, Operation Desert Storm, we basically shot and blew up every bridge, every airport, and Iraq had brought all of its troops to the borders, so they were completely cut off from, their centralized government and from supplies. We cut off all their supplies routes. So eventually, hundreds and hundreds of them would surrender to a news cruise. I mean, they didn't even know who to surrender to because they were just simply hungry. They were starving. So starving Athenians finally surrendered in 404 BC. So after the war, Greece was politically unstable, which will lead to Philip II from Macedonia eventually taking over all of the city-states. And we'll look at that when we talk about Alexander the Great, but it does lead to Alexander the Great unifying Philip II and then his son Alexander unifying all of Greece.